Ebusian for Mammy now about strong ever possible multimedia needing points so and then they can win a channel so let's show so very video no share you know like to comment to subscribe we and watch content no and so I recommend the channel no ammonia be so videos ni be meeting edifying such you aka possible our channel we dey can edit farm man you say one twagu e my Ghana mu uti a obetumi ehia bibia free mu na do so ko hwe mi no ka so de ba ko bia drop air trendy power information by highway no so na enya video nim say ya say no eche yenko tie say me audio.
You don't have to elect national officers. Now why do I say this? So you don't have to elect those officers that the party is not presenting to the nation for an election. Let me say that again. We are advocating that political parties should stop going through an electoral process to elect people like the chairman of the party who the party is not presenting to the general public for elections. Now, who are the party presenting for general public for elections? Two sets of people. There are only two sets of people that the party is presenting to the general public for elections. So those sets of people, they should elect them and then they present them to us. Okay. The presidential candidate is elected by the party for a further election by the general public. So the party elects John Dramani Mahama, presidential candidate of the NDC. Now, it doesn't end there. He is elected so that the NDC presents him for the presidential elections. And then political members of parliament, so Sam George or Ablakwa, member of parliament for Ningo Pram or member of parliament for Norton, they are elected so that they will be presented by the NDT as their candidate for a bigger election. That's them. Now, so the presidential candidate and the parliamentary candidate ought to be elected. The party chairman, however, ought not to be elected. If we want our democracy not to be derailed from the way we are seeing it, the Johnson Asiedu Nketia, as chairman of the party, ought to be appointed by the presidential candidate. He has to have the power to appoint his team. Otherwise, if we go on to do the way we are doing it, we are completely derailing our democracy. So NDC recently went to Congress. The presumptive presidential candidate is John Dramani Mahama. The timetable suggests that they have not yet elected their presidential candidate, and therefore, they say the leader of the party is the national chairman, okay? But they will be electing the presidential candidate. That presidential candidate, they are presenting him to the general public. That presidential candidate needs to work with the general secretary, the party chairman, national officers. He forms part of the national executive to move on. The people he's working with, he's more important than them. John Mahama is more important than those people, not because he's more important, but because he's the one that the NDC is presenting for a general election. The parliamentary candidate in the constituency is the most important person for both the NDC, for either the NDC or the MPP, because he's the one that they are presenting to the rest of the nation. Why then do you allow a process of an election of this executive cost hundreds of millions of cedis for both political parties? A lot of rancor. John Mahama would have his preference. If it turns out that his preference is not Asiedu Nketia wins, you are undermining the policy formation of the National Democratic Congress. The system is undermining the policy formation of the National Democratic Congress. And we have seen it happen so many times. We saw the huge fights, which even ended up in court between Peter Ajete and J.A. Kufuor. It got to a point where Peter Ajete, the chairman of the party, was accusing Mr. Kufuor of something. The matter went to court. The party was thinking of suing me. This whole, very rancorous kind of relationship between the chairman of the party, P.A. Ajete, and the presidential candidate of the party, J.A. Kufuor. We have seen it happen. John Mahama wanted Dana Bodakwi to be the chairman of the party ahead of 2020 elections. The election went and Afusampofo won it. He probably wasn't pleased with it. But this is the person he has to work with. Why are we giving our politics such difficulty? So we're advocating that there has to be a way in which the political parties redo their timetable, and perhaps the IPAC and the Electoral Commission should discuss it. Should we continue to elect national chairman? Why don't we just elect a presidential candidate and then he appoints them? Because he's going to work with them. For the next period of time that he is there, he appoints them. So a new presidential candidate elected, he appoints new national executive officers that he's going to work with. Okay, so John Mahama does not have to, he has to appoint Asiedu Nketia. Asiedu Nketia ought not to be elected upon John Mahama's head, because that means he's going to John Mahama to go and take money for the campaign. It's widely rumored that John Mahama paid for the NDC Congress. Because there are no systems that allow the people, anybody to pay for this. Why is this so expensive? It's expensive because they are electing people. And these people that they are electing, they are not presenting them to the general public for any election. The person they are presenting for the general public is then forced to work with people, whether he likes them, whether he doesn't like them. I think that is derailing our politics, is rancors, and we have to cut it off. And I'll go to the UK and show you an example of what I'm talking about. So here is John Mahama. He should be appointed as Asiedu Nketia should not be elected upon his head. Let's look at the next one. Fifth equity, John Mahama should be appointed the general secretary of the party. Same. He should be appointing all these people, Sami Jemfi and all of that. Now, John Mahama, it is widely rumored, did not support George Oparado's election weeks ago in Cape Coast. John Mahama, it is widely reported, supported Boja Jemfi to the point where he had to call the two men and try and smoke some peace pipe with them. Why would you put the presidential candidate in that kind of situation? He is the presidential candidate. He's on the ballot for the party. He's the most important person for the NDC ahead of the next election. Why must he campaign for Boja Jemfi or for George Oparado? That's a waste of his time. He doesn't have time. He needs to be thinking policy. He needs to be having meetings, writing documents, preparing his campaign. Why is it that he has to forget about his campaign and now decide on, should I support Boja Jemfi or should I support Oparado? And he has to cough up money, not just for the individuals he supports, but to run the entire process. Why are we doing that? We think it's blatantly wrong. That should stop. So Boja Oparado wins the election anyway. A lot of money spent in Cape Coast. A lot of money spent in Accra. As I'll put the MPP one, let me show you. Look at the Accra Sports Stadium on your screen. This is what happens. Look at how many people are seated over there. About 20,000 people get into the stadium. They have to be bussed. They have to be fed. And they will do this again when they are electing a presidential flag bearer. Here's Johnson Asiedu Nketia receiving chairs of supporters who voted for him. Why should a party chairman be elected? Here is Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, who in 2017-18 preferred that a certain man called Alhaji Short should be the national chairman of the New Patriotic Party. That was his preference. People who are close to him tell us that Nana Akufo-Addo was of that mindset because he felt that Paul Afoko exiting was a northerner, and therefore you have to replace the party chair because one northerner came and he couldn't finish his term. So the party chair position must be returned to the north. So Alhaji Short, who was the northern regional chairman of the party also, was his preference for the national office. Other people had different ideas. They convinced him about Freddie Blair. They had to convince him because you needed him to support the candidate to win. So Freddie Blair won. This time they had to convince him to support Stephen Ntim. He's the candidate of the party. He's exiting right now, but he's president now. A new flag bearer is going to be elected. National officers have been elected before the flag bearer comes into office. Why is that so? So Nana Akufo-Addo may not have wanted Stephen Ntim, but Stephen Ntim has been elected upon his head. Justin Kodia, it was widely rumored the MPP establishment wanted John Boedu to continue. You can understand that the MPP establishment is the outgoing one. The incoming will be with the one who will win the presidential election. But we have to have a system that the one who is going to be on the ballot is the one appointing a general secretary for the party. The MPP elections was held at a stadium like the NDC one. Millions of Ghana cedis was spent on what? Nothing. Because if you elect Justin Kodia, you are not presenting Justin Kodia to the world for election. That is why Ashanti region will go and elect Chairman Wontumi, because Chairman Wontumi may not be electable to the rest of the general public. But as far as MPP is concerned, they like him. But if they were presenting Chairman Wontumi for a national election, they may have thought that Chairman Wontumi might not be electable for the whole country. But he's our man, and within our party he'll work. So the presidential candidates can appoint Chairman Wontumi to a role. We don't have to be electing national, regional chairman, regional executive, polling station executive, the constituency parliamentary candidates. And that means that the stakes will be higher for presidential slots and parliamentary slots. Because once you become a presidential candidate, you have all these appointive powers. Same way as president. Why do we allow president to appoint his ministers? Why don't we elect them? Why don't we just elect them? In some countries, they elect the president, they elect a chief justice for the president, they elect an IGP. In some countries, the IGP is by voting. The Chief Justice is by voting. In America, many states, the Attorney General is elected. Why are you having all of these elections? We will let the president appoint his ministers. But when it comes to a national executive who he has to work with to win the election, we say they should be elected upon his head. And I'm going to show you tonight that history is when we used to elect running mates. But we decided as a country that you cannot choose a running mate for a presidential candidate. How do you do that? And when in 1992 we came to find out that in 79 running mates were elected, we were laughing at the people of 79. Let's not make prosperity laugh at us when they come and see what we did. And they will find the illogicality that we did. And they will wonder why we did that. Why are we electing the party chairman? The presidential candidate must appoint the party chairman. That's how it should work. The presidential candidate must appoint the party chairman. The parliamentary candidate must appoint the constituency chairman. That's his man. He's going to work with him. They go, they lose the election, they are out. They go, they win the election, they continue. That's the way we have to do it. Because this electing people and electing people and electing people, it really doesn't work. Alhaji Mahama Baumia is in the saddle. He has to now look for money for party events, to support some national organizers, support regional days, support parliamentary candidates. Parliamentary candidates are raising money to support somebody to become constituency chairman. Recently, I heard a story about Adenta. And the story about Adenta is that Ramadan is in trouble. So I asked, why is Ramadan? You know, I like Ramadan. I like young people who do that. And because he went to Preseke, I've known him for a while. He's my friend. I like him. Okay. Now, so I asked, how is Ramadan doing? And they said, Ramadan is in trouble. He may lose the primaries. I said, why? Then they told me that Ramadan lost all the primaries. He lost all the executives during the election. Ramadan did not run for any executive in Adenta. But the story is that he lost all. I said, okay, who did he lose it to? They said, Ramadan lost it to Oyelita. So I called my people and said, you see, we have to put out this editorial. The story in Adenta today is that Ramadan, who did not run for any constituency office, lost the elections. Oyelita, who also did not run for any constituency elections, say she won the elections. So she has her executives in place. So it's more likely that she will be elected. It's not proper. It's not about anybody or anything. We have to build our democracy differently. And we have to build it with original thinking. And for the little thinking that we have done, that we are suggesting to you, viewers, we think that the civil society must begin to talk about this. We cannot continue to elect people who are not going to be presented for a national election. It doesn't make sense. So Akufo-Addo should be appointing Justin Kodu, not the other way around. Nana Boakye, the presidential candidate, should be appointing them. Kejefua, the presidential candidate, should be appointing them. That's what should happen. The way it's going is not correct. Now I'm going to show you what happened in 1979. Very interesting. And why we moved away from the 1979 story. Because in 1979, running mates was elected. Why? We are laughing at them today. They elect a presidential candidate and then they elect a running mate. So this is Dr. Liman, elected as a presidential candidate. Dr. Liman may not have wanted Dick Johnson as his running mate. But why? Is it by force? He is the one who is going to be president of the country. You are choosing by force for him through an electoral process a running mate. But why? We learned from that and we taught ourselves that this is not good. So in 1992 we decided that the presidential candidate shall appoint the running mate. End of story. He can do that in consultation with National Council, in consultation with X, in consultation with Y, in consultation with anybody. But the power to appoint his running mate is for the presidential candidate. But it wasn't like that before. They used to elect. Give me the text. Let's read it. And let people believe that we know what we are talking about. So this is from a book entitled The Biography of Dr. Liman. It's written by former Vice Chancellor Ivan Adai-Mensah, Vice Chancellor of the University of Ghana, I should say. Very, very pleasant man. I've met him. Great guy. Great brain as well. And a great politician, I should say. But Adai-Mensah has capacity to write this book because, you know, he was General Secretary of the party, of the PNP that won the election. Many people don't know that. Those of us who found out, we didn't believe it. Because those who didn't see Adai-Mensah in that life and only saw him as a university don vice chancellor, we don't know how to reconcile the Adai-Mensah, the vice chancellor, and Adai-Mensah, the general secretary, because the general secretaries that we saw, they are kind of attack dogs and they are blasting each other, and we can't see how Professor Adai-Mensah would do that in 79. But of course, the politics of 79 was very high standard, very, very decent, and that's how a decent man like Adai-Mensah can survive as a general secretary of the party that actually won the election. Let's go to the document. It says 7 candidates contested the vice presidential slot. Can you imagine that? 7 candidates contested the vice presidential slot. Somebody is president, other people are contesting the vice presidential slot. That's what happened in 1979. Okay. 7 candidates contested the vice presidential slot, namely Professor J.W.S. de Graaf Johnson, then director of the Building and Road Research Institute of the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, Professor M.M. Owusu-Ansah of the Institute of Adult Education, a lawyer and banker, Mr. Fred Segbefia, a legal practitioner, Mr. Johnny Hansen, a private legal practitioner and founder of the PRP, which later merged with the PNP, Dr. Isaac S. Efson, a private legal practitioner and historian, and Dr. Kojo Hansen, a private medical practitioner. Like Lehman, de Graaf Johnson had originally wanted to be a parliamentary candidate and had been nominated on the 9th of April 1979 as the party's candidate for Cape Coast constituency.